Hi, my name is Lena, and I am currently a MAPC student at the University of San Francisco. I'm also a bilingual podcaster hosting several Chinese and English podcasts. Today, I'm going to share with you a recent finding and some thoughts about the inclusion problem in our podcasting industry. Is it necessary to have language and subtitle translations as one of the must-have features of all the podcast platforms? Through my podcast journey, I have never really encountered the need for language and subtitle translations. Like many others, I just naturally believed that a podcast as an audio product is supposed to be used solely by ears without accompanying reading materials. In January 2024, my Chinese podcast editor and I began preparing our Chinese language podcast to tell the diverse stories of the Chinese immigrant community while bridging the language barrier between them and the native English-speaking Americans. At first, my editor wanted to add English subtitles to the Chinese podcast audio for wider accessibility. However, I discovered that the mainstream platforms like Apple Podcast and Spotify all lack this feature in their platforms. We have tried our best to find the solution to make our podcast with English subtitles, but in the end, we had to settle for a video version of the podcast with edited subtitles available only on our YouTube channel. This experience made me reflect on my original understanding about podcasts. When I asked around my friends or family members, they all had the same first reaction. Why does podcast medium need the subtitles anyway? It is audio, so use your ears. Nobody seemed to care about this insignificant problem, since it is not about the needs of the majority of users. At some point, my editors and I were so frustrated because we spent tons of time and effort trying to enable a feature that those podcast platforms had never considered included. This raises critical questions. Are podcasts only for those who can hear and understand the language? What about those with hearing problems or those interested in stories told in other languages? Then, eventually, this leads to my ultimate question. Are our current podcast platforms inclusive enough? In fact, Apple Podcast and Spotify have addressed these issues in the past. In March 2024, Apple iOS 17.4 released audio transcripts to the Apple Podcast app for iPhone, allowing you to read along with your favorite podcasts as they are spoken. Spotify has also created transcript videos of audio segments since September 2023. It seems like these main podcast platforms have been trying to raise awareness of inclusion. However, not many people are aware of this feature. To get some insights about how this feature has been associated with the public, I did a small interview and a survey around my campus to quickly get some ideas. So I just want to know how many of you guys listen to podcasts?
I do.
You do? Okay. So do you listen to Apple Podcast or Spotify? Which platform?
I use Apple, yeah.
Okay, so do you know that Apple Podcasts have subtitles and transcript features?
I did not know that, no.
You don't know.
No.
So do you think it will be nicer or better if they have this features built in?
Probably, yeah. I don't see how that would hurt.
So which platform you are using?
I mainly use Spotify.
Spotify. So do you know Spotify has transcript features built in for users?
I don't. I normally just,
You don't know.
Yeah, I
So-
normally just play it and have the earphones in.
Okay, so nobody knows that, like in your friend circle.
No.
So do you think it would be better or nicer if they have this features built in?
I mean, it's nice to have, but it depends on the user.
Now let's talk about the survey. I collected 25 responses from the users. 21 of them are active podcast users. When they were asked whether they know about Apple Podcast and Spotify's features of transcript and the subtitle feature, 76% of them said no, they are not aware of these features at all. When they were asked if they think it's necessary to have the transcript and the subtitle features built in podcast platforms, 40% of them said yes. 40% of them said it's nice to have it, but not that necessary. And 20% of them said, I'm not sure. It seems like not that important to me. Okay, got it. It seems like Apple and Spotify really need to allocate some budget on marketing these amazing new features to let more people know about it. Just because we don't need it, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be learning about it and include it in our technology for those who really need it. So, my next questions are, who would actually benefit from these features? Are the users who need them truly a minority? I included this question in my survey, and I'm pleasantly surprised by the thoughtful responses it received. Participants mentioned that ESL and new language learners and individuals who are hearing impaired could truly benefit from subtitles while listening to podcasts. Some respondents also highlighted that those with auditory processing difficulties, hearing disorders, or ADHD could find the transcript feature helpful. Additionally, educators who use podcast materials for teaching purposes and anyone who just simply wants to read along or refer to the transcript while listening to podcasts could benefit from these features. Given so many potential benefits, why haven't we made these options readily available and easy to access? Let me be clear, the features available right now on Apple Podcast and Spotify are essentially auto-generated transcript features, and it seems like mainly for English users. From what I've learned, they cannot translate between two different languages. Additionally, for podcasters who wish to include subtitles in the second language for their audience, there is currently no feature available to achieve that. As a bilingual podcaster, my mission has always been to bridge the gap between people with different language and culture backgrounds. When I share Chinese immigrant stories in Chinese, I aim to include English subtitles along with the audio. This allows non-Chinese speakers to learn about the stories and the Chinese immigrant community. Additionally, for immigrants with limited English proficiency, such as my parents, I want them to be able to listen to the English podcasts I produce, as well as access English content from reputable sources like the BBC to stay informed. Enabling a feature on podcast platforms that allows podcasters to provide different language subtitle options could indeed be beneficial for uniting people with shared information simultaneously. This feature would enhance accessibility for diverse audiences, regardless of their language proficiency, and promote inclusivity within the podcasting community. It would facilitate the dissemination of information to a broader audience, fostering greater understanding and connection among listeners from different linguistic backgrounds. According to the latest data, there are currently over 464 million podcast listeners worldwide. In 2023, the global podcasting market size reached $24.03 billion. Now I'm wondering, if we make the transcript and the language subtitle features available on all podcast platforms, will these numbers be boosted significantly? Now reflecting on my editor's request for English subtitles for my Chinese podcast, which initially seemed unreasonable to me, I realized that it was actually a legitimate need, one that shouldn't have been disregarded initially. Podcasts serve as a medium for spreading information and sharing stories globally, and there are still many new features that could be incorporated to make them more inclusive than they are right now. If you think this makes sense, please join me on advocating for these changes. Here are some steps you can take. 1. Contact the podcast platform directly to request the addition of transcriptions with various language options. 2. Advocate for users to utilize closed captioning transcription services by simply enabling them while listening. This will provide these platforms with increased data yield and usage counts. If each of us takes a small action in this regard, I believe these changes will occur very soon.